I want to welcome you this morning to our CEO Chick Chat interview with Heidi Kallett. We are taped here live before a live audience here at the offices of Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, Pittman in Washington, D.C. So I'm so glad you're taking the time. No matter if it's morning, night, if you have insomnia and you've discovered us, we thank you for coming in. You're going to discover some fascinating insights into what it is to be a CEO, to be a woman, to be innovative, to have great ideas, and spill your guts. So that's what we're here to do. And I want to be, for the purpose of full disclosure, Heidi is a girlfriend of mine. She is also a fellow Texan. And it's like when you are a Texan, you just know in a room.
Yes, you do.
The
just, word y'all.
Yeah, I mean, it's the y'all factor. But we always just kind of find each other in the room, and it somehow comes up. And I don't know why we need to identify. I think there's just some kind of understanding about being from Texas.
Yes.
A little bit of sass, a little vinegar, some greens, some grits, all of those things that we think make a Southern woman.
Yes.
So I want to welcome you.
Thank
we
you.
also have another common bit of roots is that you're also from Florida. You started your life in Florida.
My adult life, my married life was in Florida.
So that's, I think, really interesting. I was born in Florida, in Jacksonville, Florida. I lived there for 2 weeks, packed my diaper bag, and hit the road. And so I was a toddler vagabond for a number of years. So Heidi, I really wanted to talk with you today because I think your story is so fascinating. And I wanted to kind of go back and kind of find out how you ended up where you are today, because you have one of the most recognizable brands in Washington, D.C., and you are the CEO and owner of the Dandelion Patch. You've just opened your 4th store in a down economy. So I'm here to question your sanity or your strategy, because that's incredible, but you have amazing success and you have a strategy. And those of us who are kind of in your inner circle are privileged to kind of see what you're doing and how you're approaching this. So let's kind of talk about your roots a little bit, because I think it helps us understand you and why you're doing this kind of business.
Okay. So where do you want to start?
Well, start what you think is important for us to know about you,
well,
your childhood and stuff.
You know, it's funny because when I was growing up, I'm the oldest of 3 children, and I was always expected to be the responsible one. And I was, to be honest. I was, a good student and a good daughter, and I took care of my younger siblings. We were latchkey kids when we were growing up because my mother and father both worked. And surprisingly, most people don't know this, my father actually owned a business when I was growing up as well. And he was early in the days where Whole Foods that we all know now, he started a company called Sun Harvest Farms in Texas and grew it with a couple of partners to, 14 locations in the Texas area. And so I remember very vividly as a young child on a Saturday, that's what we did. We went and we traveled to the stores and saw how they were doing and visited with customers and visited with the management team. And so now it's funny that I'm walking in those same shoes with my 11-year-old and 9-year-old, and that's what we do on a Saturday. We go and we visit my store. So, it certainly wasn't planned. I didn't know growing up that I wanted to own my own business and follow in my father's footsteps, but I think it's kind of funny that I ended up doing that.
So tell me a little bit about this Sun Harvest store. So they grew it pretty big. It was before or at the time Whole Foods was launched?
I think, I was so young, I don't know. It was in the early 80s. So I think Whole Foods had probably started in California, and they were doing kind of the same concept or a similar concept in Texas. But Whole Foods was not in Texas at the time.
So I know that, but that was kind of from the era when you had the small local. I mean, there was Tom Thumb. What do we have in Texas? We had Kroger's, H-E-B.
Yes.
We had Kroger's, Tom Thumb.
Piggly Wiggly.
Piggly Wiggly, yeah. So you can tell you were from Texas if you know these things,
Right. Yes.
Actually, the Tom Thumb in Arlington, Texas was supposed to be one of the great pickup joints for singles.
I wouldn't know. I was young at the time. I don't know.
I mean, I thought that was kind of crazy, So when I was dating my husband, he actually one time met me over there.
In the frozen food section?
Yeah, it was actually in the frozen food section. That's where all the singles go. I thought that was kind of weird. But it wasn't how I met him, but I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. So one of the things I really find fascinating about you is that you went very much the traditional Southern girl path. You were a cheerleader. As tiny as she is, she was a cheerleader. You were very much involved in academic. You kind of followed this path, which was not kind of what your mother had done.
No.
So you kind of stepped out of that.
Mm-hmm. My mother's an accountant, and she's very rigid. No, that's not the right word. She is, she's very structured, which actually, to be honest, I'm probably a little more that way as well. But, I don't know where you're trying to get to, but,
well, we're talking about the fact
but
that
I know my mother and I are alike in a lot of ways and not alike in some. And so I was always the social extrovert, and my mother tends to be more the introvert, more the mechanical, methodical, process-driven. And I am always, and have always been, big picture, out-of-the-box, creative thinker. And I'm obviously an extrovert. And so I guess in those ways we're different.
So let's talk about your college experience. When you went to college, what you studied, what you thought you were going to do. What was your vision at that time in your life?
I had no idea. I just knew I wanted a corner office somewhere and I was going to rule the world. I didn't really, and I remember I was, my degree's in marketing, and I remember telling my father that I was getting a degree in public relations, and he said, and what are you going to do with that? I'm like, I don't know, go to New York City and have a big office. And he goes, okay, that's a good plan. Start working on that. You know, I think going back to the cheerleading days, that was the one thing that I think really significantly differentiates me between maybe some others is that I have 107 goals written down.
Which is one of the things I do want to talk about today.
Okay.
Because I think that that is such a fascinating, it's one of the things I want to get to, because I think everybody's going to walk out of this room and want to achieve what you've done and understand how to get there.
Well, so when I was a cheerleader, before I was a cheerleader, you know, in junior high or whatever, I decided I wanted to be a cheerleader, and I knew nothing. And if you're not from Texas, you don't understand. It's a really big deal. I mean, people were, I don't know if you remember, if you're old enough to remember, but like there was a mother that killed for her daughter to be on the cheerleading squad. Okay, well, that was my growing up years. And so it was a really big deal. And so I knew that I wanted to set a goal for myself to be a cheerleader, and there were things that I had to do and processes that I had to go through and things that I had to learn to get there. And that was my very first experience, and I was 12, you know, I was young. And that was my first experience of saying, okay, here's my goal, and how do you back into that? And what are the steps that I take to get there? And so I think that lesson has changed my life.
I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share about the fact it wasn't that, isn't that cool, she's a cheerleader. It's the fact, the understanding that here is a goal, an objective, and there's a strategy to get there.
Right.
And if you're from Texas, you have to understand high school football is a big, big deal. On the evening news, we have reports where all of the high schools are in their ranking and how they performed during the season. I mean, it's a really big, big deal. So to be a cheerleader was also a big deal. I did not come from that culture because I was raised overseas, and I was in Japan at the time, and it was definitely not cool to be a cheerleader. So I didn't have that on my goal set. So, but so I thought that was really interesting. So let's talk about how. So you kind of knew you wanted a corner office, but you didn't really know. And
I didn't know what I wanted to do in that corner office. I just knew I wanted one.
So, and you went to school, college in Texas. And then when you graduated, you went to Florida.
Correct.
So, and what drove you to go to Florida, back to Florida from Texas? Why didn't you stay there? I mean, that's usually kind of like the hometown kind of.
You know, I actually knew that I always wanted to. I grew up in Texas, and I grew up in a very comfortable middle class, upper middle class family, and we didn't really have. I didn't really travel. I mean, we went skiing every once in a while, and we would go on vacations. But we went to vacation in Florida because I had family there. I didn't. So I knew that I wanted to see the world before I had my corner office. And so Eastern Airlines, for those of you who remember, came crawling at Texas Tech, and I interviewed and I got a job. And I never lied on my application. I never lied in my interview. They never asked how tall I was. And I wore lovely heels and stood up tall. And I was hired, and they paid for me to go to Miami, which is probably, I mean, I can't believe they made these decisions. They flew me and moved my stuff to Miami. I spent 6 weeks in training, and then all of a sudden they did this random height and weight check, and what do you know? I'm 4'11". And so they said, you're not 5'2". I'm like, yeah, no, I know I'm not 5'2". I've never told you I was 5'2" or otherwise. Well, at the time, you had to be 5'2". I don't know if it's law anymore, but at the time you had to be 5'2" to be a flight attendant. Remember, I was doing this so I could see the world. And so here I was stuck in Miami with really no job. And I said, you know, I've already moved here. I've already missed the entire, you know, interview process at school. I've passed up other opportunities. What am I going to do? I need an opportunity. And they were in the middle of bankruptcy. Do you remember this? So they said, you know, we've got this position in Tampa for a customer service agent. I said, you know what? That's fine. You know, I was 20. They moved me from Miami to Tampa as the customer service agent. I was that person when you missed your flight or the flight was canceled or the bags were lost, you were screaming at me. And it was the worst job I've ever had. But I have to tell you, that was such great experience because I learned how to keep my mouth shut and smile a lot and understand that it's not personal. And it was just one step that I had to take to get to my corner office. And so it was a really good kind of business life experience. And I met my husband in Tampa.
So I think that's, you know, and you talk about height. My father was a Navy pilot and a fighter pilot, and he used to land airplanes on jets on aircraft carriers, which I thought, that's the craziest job. If you've ever, like, see an aircraft that's kind of bumping in the water, and you got to land it. So, but I thought I wanted to be a fighter pilot too, and I actually was going through the phone process, and I had the degree and I had the credentials and I had all the other stuff. And then he goes, okay, well, I need to get a few more things from you. And I go, yes. He goes, well, now I need to know your height and weight. And I go 5'2", and there's this long pause. And he goes, ma'am, we like our pilot's feet to be able to reach the pedals. So that's when I learned that height does play a part in your life. But one thing I've noticed about you, and I have a lot of friends who are more in a petite stature. How do you manage that? Do you feel like it's been?
I don't know that I'm short.
I think that's me.
I don't know I'm short until I see a picture of me and there's all of my friends and then Heidi, and I realize, oh gosh, I am kind of pretty short. I mean, I don't think of myself as little. I don't think of myself as small.
And I think that's
I don't recognize it.
It's an important lesson, especially anybody watching here today. Even if you have small stature, your stature is not what's on the exterior, it's what's on the interior. That's where stature is. And a friend of ours, Wanda Alexander, shared that
She's
with
twice
us.
My size.
Yeah, she is twice her size. But I thought that was really an important lesson. Stature is something internal, not external. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us to remember. So let's talk about your husband, Joel, because Joel is an important part of your story, a very important part of your story. So how did you meet him and what was he doing?
So we met in Tampa. He was not one of those people that yelled at me. We met through a mutual friend, and I have to tell you, he is my biggest cheerleader, and I would not be where I am today without my husband. I knew I wanted that corner office. I didn't quite know what I wanted and how I was going to get there, but I knew that I wanted to, at some point, run an organization, run a business. And here comes my husband, who I am dating, and he's an investment banker, and all he does for a living is mergers and acquisitions. And so all of a sudden, I have, people pay millions of dollars for this kind of expertise, and he's at my bedside every night telling me, here's how you grow your business, and this is what you should do, and this is what other companies have successfully done, and you should consider. I mean, I am so fortunate in that respect to have the expertise of somebody like my husband. And so he's definitely a cheerleader. And it's hard, I think, anytime when you get a husband and wife team kind of working together. By the way, he's got a very real full-time job as an investment banker. But he deals with very large companies, so, the Deloittes of the world. And then, then there's the Dandelion Patch, which will be very large one day. But, $10,000 to him is kind of a rounding error in some respects, and $10,000 to us is a really big deal. And so conceptually, I understand what he's trying to, where he's trying to head as far as his thought process and where he thinks my business should go. But sometimes it's a little challenging because the details are different.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's really an important thing, is that whether or not your spouse is in your business or your life partner, whoever you're sharing that space with, is an integral part of how your business can grow. Because I think that if you don't have a partner who's helping you, it can sabotage you. Or plant. I think we all walk around with little seeds of doubt that are planted inside us sometimes, and we reach that little bit of an objection. We can pull those out. So I think it's really good if you've got somebody who can help pull you through. And I know that for me, that's very true, because I come up with the craziest ideas. My husband is always, just this week I was on the phone, I go, call me, I've got an idea. And he goes, whoever you are, hang up now. And I got a message back. I heard the voice in the background was cracking up.